evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the At Midnite Show. Tonight, we have an unusual guest, Joel Strote. Mr. Strote is a copyright lawyer, but at the same time, he's a musical lawyer. He also was a member of the Michigan State Choir. Also, he was in I think it's the New York Glee Club, I don't remember exactly, but he's also a member of the choir of his country. So now we're going to talk to Joel about his basic background. He's also one of the controversial figures that was in the Liberace estate and also in the Liberace movie. Welcome, Joel.
Well, thank you, Ray. First of all, I want to say it's such a pleasure to be in this incredible studio that you have here. It's just really amazing what you've done and what SnailWorx has done, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Joel. I want to tell you you're the first interviewer we're having in the new studio. And back in the green room, we've got a lot of our artists that are back there. Dave Somerville, Rich Giannatis, W. Michael Lewis. They're all back there having a Pinzoni vodka martini in celebration of the opening of the new studio. So a lot of the artists are there. And of course, Rick Giannatis handed me the book before I went on here, which you were involved in those early days as general counsel for AVI. The new book is First Legends of Disco. It had a full chapter in here about W. Michael Lewis, myself, the disco era, and many of those contracts that took place during that time. You actually composed them. So a little surprised the fact that we have a little of your legal work with us today. So, but anyway, Joe, let me get down to the meat of the day. First of all, you were at Capitol Records. You were in their legal department there. That's where I first became familiar with you. But you also represented Motown Records after you left Capitol Records. You also represented Curb Records. That's Mike Curb. And then you had many artists that you dealt with there. You built a pretty good law firm, if I recall, which was Strote and Whitehouse, which was one of the classic attorney law firms in the industry at the time. 10 million laughs along went with it with some serious work. But anyway, but with Motown, my question is, did you work with just Motown's legal department, or was it the artist, or did you work with Barry Gordy himself?
Well, I worked with the legal department. I worked with Mr. Gordy, and of course I worked with artists at the Motown group. So we did all three different things, and we handled some of their litigation. We handled their artist contracts. We did a lot of work for Motown.
Well, Motown was a classic anyway. The sound of Motown is still popular today. But the other controversial figure, who was also Lieutenant Governor of our state, was Curb Records. That's Mike Curb. You worked with him at the very beginning, or was that something you picked up later?
We were with Mike at the very beginning. My partner, Dick Whitehouse, was always counsel to Mike, and we handled most. In fact, we represented him totally in those early years. We're talking about the early 70s. We're talking about the 80s, when they were just incredibly successful and continue to be incredibly successful.
But I see that you also represented and worked with, at the very early stages, Rick James. Now, Rick's been in a lot of trouble and so forth, etc. So, what is your opinion of him?
Well, what I can tell you about Rick James is he probably, in my estimation, was one of the most incredibly talented, not only artist, not only as an artist, as a singer, but also as a writer, also as a producer, also as a person who could probably even make movies. He was that incredibly talented. He produced such great acts. I remember he produced Tina Marie.
Tina Marie, I remember that.
What a talent. I mean, what more could you say about Rick James?
So I understand he was from upstate New York, is that right?
He was from Buffalo, and there's another thing. He was a guy that came up through the streets and made his first success in Toronto, as I recall, and then was notified. Then Motown found out about him, and then they signed him, and then I was involved in his Motown contracts. But just being involved with him was an honor. I consider it an honor.
Well, I see another controversial figure here on your list of successes, and that was Marvin Gaye. Now, did you work with him, or did you have the same opinion, or?
Marvin was also a very talented, and we all know how talented Marvin was. I not only represented Marvin, but I represented his former wife, Anna Gaye, as well, and both of them were wonderful people, terrific, just great people, in my opinion.
Well, he was a fabulous artist, no question about it. I love Marvin Gaye, but I see too you work with Brittany Spears. That had to be very interesting.
Yes, and Brittany, another talent. I mean, what it shows is that I've been so fortunate to meet these brilliant, talented people, and Brittany Spears was no exception.
Oh. What about Chick Corea? That I know you've been to Chick Corea a long time, so I got to hear it all. I even went with you once to a Chick Corea show, which was fabulous.
Chick became controversial, I think, because of his engagement with Scientology, and that's unfortunate because this is his religion, and we should respect that. But he, as a talent, there's nobody that could be more talented as a keyboard player and as a writer and as a visionary. And also, what's interesting about Chick is not only is he a great jazz musician, he's a great classical musician. He's recorded classical albums.
That I didn't know myself.
Which is astonishing.
Yeah,
that's how talented this person is.
So, but let's move on a little bit. But I also know that you represented a lot of movie stars involved in there. I know that you had Glen Ford, but he was quite an interesting character. But you probably know him a lot more intimately than I do.
Well, one thing about Glen, he was in the golden age of movies, and this is a guy who really was around and could regale you with stories of the old time movie stars, Rita Hayworth, Bill Holden, who he was big friends with, and these are very interesting people that were in the 40s and 50s in Hollywood at a time when it was just bustling with brilliance.
Well, that's under the studio system, I guess. Was he in the studio system?
Yes, he was.
He was in the studio system. He did a lot of westerns also.
Oh,
but
he did.
I have a few of those myself. What about Ernie Borgnine? You had Ernie for a long time.
All you could say about Ernie is unqualifiedly the nicest guy you will ever meet. He was a guy who, even though he was a terrific movie star and well known throughout the world, he was like Marty. He was like Marty off screen. He would treat the most humble person on the street no differently than if he was meeting the Queen of Belgium.
Wow. So he was just an ordinary nice guy.
One of the nicest persons you could ever meet.
Now let me get down to the real core of why we invited you on the show. Liberace. And you worked with Seymour Heller, who was the actual guy who discovered Liberace. And you worked with him at the end of Liberace's life. There was so many controversies. So Scott Thorson was with Liberace for a number of years, as I recall. But he was a controversial figure. Now along comes the time when the original lawyer for Liberace passes away, who was not very competent as far as if I remember.
Mr. Jacobs.
Mr. Jacobs, right. When Liberace died, okay, you were there in the midst of that whole thing as you represented Lee. If I'm not mistaken, did you write his will, or did you write?
I can tell you exactly what happened.
Well, I want to hear it. I'm sure the audience wants to hear that too.
I had really no idea that Lee was as ill as he was. About, I'd say, 6 weeks or 5 weeks before his death, he invited me to come to his Malibu place, and at that time he told me he wanted me to represent his interests after he died. I then contacted an estate lawyer, and we had his estate planning taken care of. That's basically what occurred.
So, in other words, the estate lawyer set it up as per Lee's instructions.
Through me.
Through you. Now, at the end of it, were you with him right before the time he died?
Oh, yes, I was there.
You were there when he died then, I take that. So, when he died, but was all of his estate in order at that time?
Yes.
It was already done.
We got it all done, and it was done well. In fact, the beauty of that estate plan was that the bulk of Liberace's estate was given to his foundation And this foundation that he formed, which was in 1979 or 6 or around that area, this foundation gave scholarships to young, aspiring artists, musicians, movie people, whatever, anything in the entertainment world in the university system.
Okay, so he actually, Liberace then, what you're saying, he had a vision exactly what he wanted to do, and he did that. But now along comes this Scott Thorson guy. Now, Scott Thorson, was he there involved in that? Because if I remember correctly, before I guess Liberace knew at the time he was going to die anyway, but Scott Thorson was in the picture, and Liberace was either separating himself from Scott Thorson, or either Scott Thorson was involved to the point where Liberace could not get him out of the way. Because I understand that there was a settlement or something before Liberace died.
I'll give you a little chronology. Scott Thorson sued Liberace before he died, while he was alive. That was the famous palimony case.
Was he sick at the time?
No, at that time, to my knowledge, he was not. He was not ill. And Scott Thorson basically took the position that he was entitled to a large amount of money from the Liberace estate because he was in a palimony relationship with Liberace. That lawsuit was settled. So that was that litigation. Then after Liberace died, there was other litigation against me, actually, saying that I basically manufactured everything to get me involved, so that I become involved as the sole spokesperson for the estate.
Well, was that Scott Thorson's?
No, Scott Thorson was not involved.
He wasn't involved in that.
Scott
So, in other words, that was involved in other Liberace attachments and so forth.
Scott Thorson was involved with the palimony case, and then thereafter, after Liberace died, he wrote a book about his relationship with Liberace, and that book became the subject of a HBO TV movie called Behind the Candleabra, which starred Michael Douglas and Matt Damon, I think.
Yes, it was Matt Damon was what played Scott Thorson in that. Now,
That is correct.
Now, of course, this is many years later that this book.
That was just recently.
Yeah, exactly. And Michael Douglas playing Liberace and so forth. But now, were you aware of elements of that book, or would that book come out before, many years before this, this movie was done?
Yes, the book came out before, way before the actual movie, the TV movie. And I can tell you that in the book, I think Scott tried to take care of some people in there. Let's put it that way. I think he was very negative toward Liberace's manager, Seymour Heller. He was very negative toward myself. So I think he was trying to settle some old scores.
So he,
that would be my opinion.
Yeah, I recall some words that he had with Seymour Heller. I recall that. But anyway, on the other side of the coin, though, but to me, I don't remember Liberace ever being that kind of a guy. He was always a very nice person. I've had dinner with him. I cooked dinner for him. You were around him all the time. You've been on trips with him, whatever. He was a gentleman in most every respect. But the way that movie portrayed him, were you familiar with anything like that? From his house or whatever. You've been up there.
No. First of all, I think unfortunately this movie portrayed Liberace in a light that probably, in my opinion, was not very conducive to somebody wanting to know Liberace. Liberace was a wonderful human being. He was a person who was in many ways like Ernie Borgnine. He would walk the streets of Los Angeles or anywhere he was without any protection. He would wear regular clothing. If he saw people on the street that recognized him, he would be very friendly and charming to them. He was a wonderful person, and of course, as a entertainer, he was beyond good.
Well, I agree with you there. He was beyond the Candleabra as far as I can turn.
But unfortunately, this movie did not show that aspect of what Liberace was all about.
Now, the controversy also too is about Lee as a piano player. I know Liberace was a great piano player. What about yourself? You were around a lot of those things. You saw a lot of that stuff. I mean,
well, first of all, he was a prodigy. He played with the Chicago Symphony when he was, I think he was a preteen. Some of his recordings, if you listen to some of his recordings, he was an extraordinary keyboard player, an extraordinary pianist. So in addition to his abilities as an entertainer, as a showman, as a person who would wow audiences to the point where they'd come back over and over and over, I think he encouraged a lot of people to become entertainers, to become piano players. He was that kind of a person, and his foundation continued that aspect of it.
Yeah, but I didn't see that in the movie, Joel. I mean, there was nothing in the movie that really showed his phenomenal playing, don't you think? I mean, I didn't see any of that.
In my opinion, this movie was not about Liberace, the entertainer. This movie was not about Liberace, the pianist. This movie was not about Liberace, the philanthropist. This movie was about his private life, and to be honest, I know nothing about his private life because I was not in his private life. I was his lawyer.
Yeah, but I mean, you went to functions with him and parties and things
Oh,
up
of
at the
course,
house.
of
I
course.
did. Everybody did. I know that a lot of the people we had in our offices went up there. Of course, Seymour Heller was always, always the king thing through that, and a jolly guy he was. And the way they portrayed him in the movie, they didn't show him off as a very smart guy, which I disagree with them.
Well, I think you have to remember that this is a book written by a person who was terminated from the Liberace group. In other words, he was at one time. Scott was part of the show in Las Vegas. He drove the car. He was the driver of the Rolls Royce that came on stage. He traveled with Liberace. He was with Liberace all the time. So here's a person who all of a sudden was no longer with Liberace. He filed a lawsuit against Liberace, the palimony suit. So he's writing a book from the outside, not the inside.
But the other thing is, do you think that Liberace at his time influenced any other artist in the world of music, rock guys or whatever? Do you think his influence is still lingering today with a lot of artists?
Clearly, he was a precursor. He was a precursor for, in my judgment, for people like Bette Midler, for people like Elton John, for people like Lady Gaga. So you have a lot of artists were influenced. First of all, Liberace is the first. I mean, whoever heard of a piano player who became a household name? Who here's a guy. All of a sudden, one day he says, I've been wearing a tuxedo. I've been on TV, but I'm going to have a show, and I'm going to wear flamboyant costumes, and I'm going to fly through the air. I'm going to do all these things. Whoever did that before? And now people saw that and they say, "Gee, he was a success." In fact, I think at one time he held the Radio City Music Hall record for the most people in the Radio City Music Hall during a show.
I think that record still stands.
And it probably does. Yeah. So of course he had an influence. In addition to him being a great showman, or Mr. Showmanship as we used to call him, but in addition to that, as a philanthropist, he gave his entire estate just about to help young people become successful in careers in the entertainment world. That's just a wonderful thing.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. You've heard a bit from Joel Strote, what his comments are. And again, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching the At Midnite Show. Remember, we're on late. We're at midnight hour.
Can I ask a question, though, Ray?
Sure.
Will Dave Somerville still be in the green room when I leave here? Because he's one of my favorites. Little Darling is probably one of my favorite songs. I grew up in the 50s even though I don't look that old.
Well, I don't want to say that, but we'll go on. But let me tell you this. Dave will probably be in the green room. He's having Penzoni Martini vodka. That's an Italian vodka. He loves martini.
So Dave will be there.
Yeah,
and what about Michael Lewis? Because, you know, El Coco was one of my...
Yeah, well, he's there.
That was one of my most...
He lives there.
Oh, he does.
So, thank you, Mr. Producer, for telling me. I appreciate it. Yeah, he'll be there. There's no question.
Well, anyway, so thanks.
You'll have Rick Giannonis there. You'll have some fun. Go back there, have a martini and a couple of hors d'oeuvres. It's on the house.